Chillcast MMA. Alright, so I'm talking about a fight that's going down March 7th, 2020. This fight is taking place at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's going to be at welterweight, UFC 248, which is headlined by Zhang taking on Jedrzejczyk. Newly ranked number 15, Jingliang, he's taking on number 14, Magny. Now this fight to me right off the bat is interesting because you have to look at these two guys' records and it just tells me a lot, more so about the second person, but I guess I'll get into it. You look at Jingliang, he's in Lee the Leech, so I don't want to keep butchering his name, but for Leech, he's 17-5, and inside the UFC, he's 9-3, and then you have Magny, who right now sits at 21-7, he's 13-6 inside the UFC. With Magny, and like I said, he's the one I'm referring to, there's something about his record where he just goes on this pattern where he's another one of these guys where he, in the same way, if you follow me, know that I talked about Donald Cerrone, he goes back and forth. Kevin Lee, back and forth. Derek Brunson, back and forth. Magny, he's probably the head of that class because, again, it's like you look at him, he's actually tenured and he's actually been in the UFC for quite a while. And he's fought a lot of the names and a lot of guys have gone past him in the UFC, but it's like to sit here and think that he made his debut in 2013 and we sit here in 2020 and I still, from then till now, I still cannot give you a definitive answer as to what it is that makes Magny quote unquote stand out as a fighter, stand out from the crop. And that's not a sort of subliminal dig or anything at Magny. It just sort of speaks to the workman-like approach that he has. But also at the same time, because he has that workman-like approach, I feel like that leaves him open to specialists. And if you look on the flip side of this, Jingliang or Lee the Leech, he's not perfect inside the UFC. He's not even perfect as a fighter as far as his style, but he's someone that I can look at, and he's heading into this fight off of a 3-fight win streak. But the last time we saw him was in August at UFC Fight Night 157. And it's just interesting to me because one of the things that I noticed, or a couple things that I noticed, was that, yes, he tends to stand a little bit straight up, and so does Magny, but straight combinations don't really work against him. And he has a great presence of mind when he's dodging counters. But one of the things that I also did notice that worries me is that he tends to stand in a straight line a little bit. You look at Stephen Thompson, he's someone that I guess is a little bit more mainstream example of this, but he stands in a straight line, which can be risky when you're trying to stand there in exchange. But Magny is someone, I don't know if I would peg him as the guy to take advantage of that the most, but it's just something I noticed. And then another thing I noticed with the Leech is that he has great head movement. And by that, you see a lot of people, they're like springs almost. Their head just moves on a complete swivel. And I don't think that he has that ability, but I noticed that he sort of has like a trait from karate, from Shotokan karate. I can just tell, I'm not saying that he's some sort of expert in it, but I can tell he has someone in there that is clearly showing him stuff that is from that branch of combat. Because one of the things that allows me to see that is anytime he throws a jab out there and he plants his feet, albeit it is in a straight line, when he moves his head back, it's in a way to where it's somewhat balanced. And again, Stephen Thompson does it, but Stephen Thompson, he's got a really wide karate stance. Conor McGregor, although he has a piston for a left hand, he keeps a sort of wide stance. And Lee the Leech, he stands a little bit more straight up and narrow, but this principle is the same. He plants his feet. Yes, he's somewhat in a Muay Thai stance, but that head movement of moving back and then reacting and switching out, the way that he enters and exits exchanges, that makes me believe that he has someone that has done some form of karate in his camp. That doesn't really feel crazy to say. Obviously, the guy's from China and trains over there, so I'm sure that would make sense and explain it. So that's not necessarily a genius point. But it's just interesting to me because when I look at the X factors, there's the obvious layup one that I could sit here and belabor about how Zhang, she, on the women's side of things, she pretty much took it by storm and, the champion and had her huge moment over there after she was able to knock out Jessica Andrade. Dana White was over there pushing her, promoting, and so maybe does Jingliang, he's already coming into this 3-0. They just ranked him actually today because prior to this week, he wasn't. They put the little NR up there and he has it, which lets me know that as of the week of January 8th, So probably on the 6th. That lets me know that they decided to put a ranking next to his name, which is weird because he didn't do anything to get that, so to speak. It just means that someone else dropped out, or they just decided to insert his name because they realize this is a high-profile fight that's coming up. It makes sense, but that might be just what it is. So I don't want to look at it, I don't want to look at it side-eyed from that perspective. But with Neil Magny, it's just, when I look at some of the things, I just feel like he gets complacent. There are times where he's able to look like a world beater and he's able to just be completely stifling. If you look at his fight with Carlos Condit, and albeit that was all the way back at UFC 219 in 2017. So what can you really take from that? And context is key. So where was Carlos Condit at the time in his career? But nonetheless, that was completely stifling. And then he follows it up and has a damn near perfect performance against Craig White. So it's like he's building this momentum. And then I remember at the time the ESPN deal had just got announced. They're having it, and so the buzz was kind of high for this one. And then he has the fight with Santiago Ponzinibbio at UFC Fight Night 140, and that was one of the more brutal finishes of 2018. And it's like, that just goes to show you. And you look at his losses to Lorenz Larkin, and the one with RDA, that's probably the one where I have to worry if anyone were to ask, as far as the grappling is concerned, how do I feel this fight would play out on the ground? I feel like you would have to go back and look at that fight with RDA, because yes, he was able to follow it up in that Carlos Condit fight and show improvements, but I don't know if those improvements will stick. Whereas with Li Jingliang, I just have to think that if Neil Magny shows some of the same holes that he showed in that fight against RDA, and some of those are just due to the fact that the guy is so tall and he's long-limbed. So if that's the case, then if it's on the ground and you were to ask me, why do you think Neil Magny would be at a disadvantage? I would refer you to his fight against Rafael Dos Anjos. And for Li Jingliang, the reason why I'm leaning towards him on the feet or whatever, or what fight, would actually be his last fight, because to date, and I don't want to take a lot from his previous fights, I feel like his fight against Zach Otto, to me, that was impressive, or his fight against Frank Camacho was impressive. But the best name, or the most recent relevant scalp on his resume to date, is Elijah Saleski dos Santos. And that, everyone knows that, and he was able to at least get it to the 3rd round. So that shows that he's at least improving on that front. But I just feel like when you're taking these guys that are ranked, I feel like there is a little bit, it makes me want to hedge my bets. So I don't want to just go out of the window and say, oh, I see a clear advantage. But again, some of the things that I said earlier, they do reinforce what I feel. I just feel like his style, it's easy to look at him and say, okay, he's a karate guy, or he's got a Muay Thai stance, or he's got little sensibilities as far as how he reacts and things like that. The truth of the matter is that there's a little bit of karate mixed into that, not so extreme and as extravagant and flashy as Stephen Thompson, but it's just in his movement. You can tell in the way that he initiates it, and the way that now he can get caught standing straight up. If you look at that fight with Dos Santos, he was able to catch him multiple times, especially in the 2nd round. And there was something about his gas tank where I'm like, okay, if Neil Magny is able to keep him working and keep it moving, maybe in the second half of the 2nd round, or in that middle part of the 3rd round, because I would trust the sort of clutchness of the leech if it came down to the last 90 seconds. But in that sort of middle part of the fight, or the second half of the 2nd round, which could be the swing part of the fight, I just wonder, because he has such great head movement, eventually that opens him up to leg kicks, because he's not moving around as much later on in the fight. He just tends to stand a little bit still, and that could get him caught against someone like Neil Magny. And I just wonder about that. So for me, if Neil Magny was going to get some sort of finish or anything like that, I think that would probably have to come in the 2nd round or early in the 3rd round. But ultimately, just trying to break this down. And again, it's taking place March 7th, 2020 at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. It's going to be UFC 248. So just wanted to give some quick thoughts on this. Sorry it's so convoluted. Going to try and get more of a structure to this, but hopefully I'm able to give you guys out there that are putting some money down on this, hopefully I'm able to give you guys a couple thoughts on it. But ultimately, when it's said and done, I was just trying to draw out who I actually want to pick. But for this one, I think it is tailor-made for Neil Magny to lose. because when I look at his record, it's like, yeah, he tends to bounce back. He rarely ever loses back-to-back. The last time he did that was 2013. So if you're a betting man, you would say, oh, he's probably prone to win this one. But I have to be honest with you, there's something about his style to where I'm like, if he comes in just slightly off, which he is prone to do, against someone that is crisp and is not going to give him them obvious sloppy looks on the feet, and if it gets to the ground eventually, then I don't like his chances even less than I do now. So ultimately, I'm just going to have to lean towards the Leech. I think he gets it done in the second round. And if Neil Magny wins, it's not going to look good. Just sort of to cap this out before I end the video. But for Neil Magny, if he wins, he's one of those fighters where this year I want to know, just like with Derek Brunson last year and Kevin Lee, where he was quiet and he put his head down and worked a little bit, which anyone that heard my rants on that, you all know how I feel. But I'm just interested to see, where does Neil Magny go? I just want to see where Neil Magny goes, because for me personally, I like him in Bellator. I feel like that format fits him a lot more, or I wouldn't mind seeing him try his hat in the PFL tournament. I really wouldn't. So that's just my personal opinion. I just feel like with the UFC, if you've been in there since 2013 and everyone feels like they can have that breakout moment, but then you see guys like Lance Palmer, he's caking out over there in the PFL. And if you take notice, guys like Marlon Moraes and Anthony Rumble Johnson, when he was outside of the UFC, these guys can get paid if they're a name and a known commodity. And he's been in the UFC for 7 years, and I just feel like instead of toiling around in anonymity, just trading wins and losses, just go to a Bellator, go to PFL, try the tournament. If you can actually win that fight night check of $1 million is going to feel good compared to just going 1-2 or 2-1 in 2020 and being ranked 14 or 15, which is where you've been for the last 3 years. So ultimately, for Neil Magny, this is my S or get off the pot moment. Not necessarily this fight, but this year, definitely. If this year is not really going to be a thing for you, I would like to see you try your hat in PFL. There's actually money in MMA now. Try to take advantage of it. And for the Leech, I don't want to just, again, toss the layup out there, but let's see. It's been 3 fights since your last loss, and that was in 2018 to Jake Matthews. So let's see if you can actually go on a 5-6 fight win streak and get up there with the guys like Usman and Covington and put some more impressive scalps on your resume, and you can actually get a belt by the end of the year. The nest is sort of already set a little bit with Weili Zhang, and you could take full advantage of it. And as far as the hardcores, they're all in on the Leech as is, so I like his chances. But again, it's going down March 7th, 2020, UFC 248. And as always, you can find me on Twitter at Nixon_speaks. And I'll see you guys later on in the week.